Welcome to this week's episode of Eye of the Swarm, your deep dive into anything and everything related to Yellow Jacket athletics. He's the big sound Matt Johnson. I am John Garver. Season 5, episode number 15. And for the first time this year, winter arrived, which is...
but only this morning.
Which is bizarre. We're recording this on Friday, the 23rd. Right, 23rd?
Yeah, 23rd.
23rd of February. Yesterday it was in the high 50s.
Yep.
And the baseball and softball teams practice outdoors, and today there's snow on the ground.
There is, although it's supposed to warm back up again.
It is supposed to warm up, but welcome to Lake Superior.
Mm-hmm. They will, and there will be baseball this weekend.
There will be baseball this weekend, yes.
We'll talk more about that in a moment.
But it is winter for a day.
It is.
And it's also...
Or maybe for a morning. I don't know. It might all be gone by this
It could all be gone by this afternoon. That is true.
Know.
But it's also playoff time.
It is.
And championship time for track and field, and the slow end to crossover season is upon us.
Yes, we're now into the final weekend, really. Well, not final weekend. Final weekend in terms of, I think, home playoff events.
Correct.
But we're fully now into the crossover part of the season. We're coming to the very end of things for the winter campaign. Men's hockey is done for the season. I had a couple of close losses in their playoff series with UW River Falls. That was last weekend. You were down at Hunt Arena for those games. Tough. I mean, whenever the season ends, it's always tough.
Yeah, it is. It is. Not surprising. You know, when you look at how 23-24 unfolded for that group of young men, not at all surprising.
Nope.
People ask me, I get asked every year, how's the team going to be? And my response last year in April, my response in August, my response in October, they'll be okay. I'm not sure who's going to score goals. And this team set the school record for fewest goals scored in a season.
Wow.
So they struggled offensively, so it was very appropriate that they got shut out in the final game of the year.
Yep.
That they lost a one-goal game, because that is something that happened to them throughout the year. And it's...
Two of them, in fact, on the weekend, wasn't it?
2 one-goal losses, yeah. Yep. You know, and you go back to Stevens Point the weekend before, I mean, there was a one-goal loss in there. You go back to Stout the weekend before, there's one-goal loss in there.
Yep.
You know, at the end of the day, they had 27 games this year, 13 times they scored 1 or fewer.
Oof.
So
hard to win that way.
You can't win if you don't score goals.
Yep.
And this team really struggled with that, so it's not at all surprising that it ended the way it did.
Yeah, only 2 combined goals in the series with the Falcons, both of them coming on Friday. And then, like you said, 1-0 loss to end it, which was too bad because they actually played pretty well statistically.
Yeah, honestly, they played well both games.
Yeah.
You know, they 6 periods down there, they had 1 dud, and it was the second period on Friday.
Yep.
But they played well enough to win. They just didn't do enough to win.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's
kind of been a theme all year.
You know, kind of the theme all season long is this team played well enough to win a lot of games, just didn't do enough to win enough games. And so here they are, you know, and it was a young group. I know Rich doesn't like hearing this is a young team. He's not into moral victories, and I understand that. But you boil it down, this is a young group. He's got a lot of...
Yeah, there's a lot of changeover this year.
There was a lot of changeover this year. I mean, he had like 11 or 12 new guys.
Yeah.
You know, he's not going to have to bring in as many this year. Obviously, now the year of experience is good for some of these young guys, because there's something there. There's some players in that group.
There's some guys that can definitely play in that group.
But you could also tell that there was freshmen in that group.
Yeah.
So I'll be curious to see how they absorb what they went through this year.
Yep.
And how they use some of that over the summer in their training and everything as they get ready to come back for next year. And I'm curious to see what he'll bring in.
Yep.
You know, I'm curious to see how he's going to handle his recruiting and how he's going to kind of look at this offseason as he gears toward next year, because really this is the first time in his 8 years that he's gone backward.
Yeah.
And
which was not the thought process.
It's always been very methodical and incremental in the build, and then it kind of leveled a little bit. Now they've gone backward. How does he get that moving forward again?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see what the offseason is going to look like and how he's going to approach that.
Yeah. So men's hockey is done for the year. Women's hockey is still in action. They'll be playing their playoff series this weekend against UW Eau Claire. Played some good games against the Blue Goals this year.
They did. They honestly, they probably could have won a couple. You know, I mean, I'm thinking specifically of the first one down in Eau Claire when they had to lead in under 2 minutes to go.
Yeah. And they played a really good game that you and I did on the radio.
Yep, that was a really good game.
Yeah, and it ended up not looking very good. I think it ended up 4-1, I think it was.
4-1 or 4-0.
Yeah, something like that. But
and
they played really well that night.
They played really well. And that was that game where they're on, all right, we're in this.
Yep.
I think it was 4-1 because we had the lead.
Yeah.
And then they
third
popped,
period.
They popped too quick early in the third period, and that was just kind of like, okay, I don't know if we're going to have the horses to come back from this.
Yep, exactly. And then they kind of ran out of gas.
Yep.
But, so that has potential to be an entertaining series. Both basketball teams are still in action. Both teams have playoff games on Wednesday that were home. I did them both on the radio.
2 pretty good games.
Yeah, the women are really playing well right now. I mean, more than anything else with the women, because they've now won 10 in a row. They beat North Central 72-59. The biggest thing I'm seeing with them is everybody on the team accepts their role, and everyone knows what their responsibilities are on the court. And you're seeing it really play out in real time.
Yep.
The other thing that I really like about what the women's team is doing right now, and the reason why I'm confident going into the 2 Saturdays championship game with Morris, is that they are taking over in fourth quarters. They've done it consistently now for during this win streak.
It feels like since the new year.
Yeah.
Basically since their tournament, they've been...
Yeah, they put distance between themselves and the opposition in the fourth quarter. They did it again against North Central. And like I said, that's been a theme throughout this 10-game winning streak that they're on. Elise Bessanen, if she's not player of the year in the conference, I'll be shocked. She's had a tremendous year. She had 25, and she was really in control in that game against North Central. And the Rams are not a pushover team. They've got a really good player in Caitlin Ryan. They've got some players that have been there before, some returners from last year's team that won 21 games. And so that was not going to be an easy game. And the ladies really stepped up, and they're getting contributions from across the board now. So, they're really playing confident basketball right now. The men, I got to give them credit as well. Had a really strong end of the regular season, and then did just enough to get by North Central in their playoff game on Wednesday as well. That was a wild game.
Because they were up by, 14? As many as 14?
Yeah, they were up by 16 at one point in the second half, and then what North Central did what they always do, which is make a run at it.
Yep.
North Central is a tricky team to play on the men's side because they're not big, but they're extremely quick and athletic on the wings. They shoot tons of threes. They're a team that shoots a lot of three-point shots, and I think they took 28 of them, I want to say. I might be wrong on that. Don't quote me, but I think it was because I think we were 9 out of 19 and they were 9 out of 28 or something like that. But the guys did enough to get the win, and now they play Bethany Lutheran for the second straight year in the conference tournament title game down in Mankato. And one of the things that the men, have done the last few weeks is they played really well on the road. They went 9-1 on the road this year. Their only loss was at Bethany Lutheran. Yeah. And it's sort of a statistical anomaly in that regard because most teams are better at home than they are on the road.
Right.
But 6 of their 8 losses have come at home, which is weird.
Friendly confines? Question mark?
Yeah, exactly. But they did enough to get the win. Max Briggs, the freshman, was really impressive. Really efficient. I think he's going to be a good ball player.
He's had a nice second half.
He has. He had 19 points, was a career high for him. Of course, just a freshman. But he was 6 for 7 from the field, 2 for 2 from 3, and 5 for 5 from the free throw line. I mean, he had a really good game before he fouled out with about 3 minutes to go. But they did enough to get the win, and that was the important part. And the women, we'll see. They're doing really well, obviously. So, and they're hosting Minnesota Morris tomorrow, as we record this on a Friday. And I'll be on the air for that one. And then, of course, men's and women's track and field indoor this weekend, starting today and tomorrow. Men's and women's tennis are still going. The men are on a nice 6-game.
They're rolling.
Yeah, they're making a nice little run here, 6 in a row now for them. And the women had a nice win against Concordia Moorhead going to the next weekend, so that's a nice little trend there. And baseball is actually going to play outdoors this weekend, taking on St. John's in a doubleheader down in Collegeville. We say that with snow on the ground here. There's supposed to be 50-degree temperatures in Collegeville this weekend.
Yeah, because they moved the game from Sunday to Monday.
Yeah.
Because there's a 15-degree change.
Okay.
Between Sunday and Monday, so they're going to get into the 60s.
Okay, wow.
And so,
that'll be fun. I might have to tune in on that one just to see
baseball
to witness
in February.
Yeah, just to witness outdoor baseball in February in
Minnesota.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
It's crazy. But going back to track and field, actually they're setting up just outside where we are for track and field. The men have won 7 straight indoor conference titles in men's track and field. That's.
I'm pretty confident it's going to be 8.
Yeah, they're looking pretty good for that. The women, the defending champions, it's going to be tight there. There's about 3 or 4 teams that could, that could give the Yellow Jackets a real push there. So that one's going to be interesting on the women's side. But on the men's side, the guys returned a lot of contributors from last year's team that ran away with things.
Yeah,
pun intended.
Yeah,
and most of those guys are back. Most of them put up big numbers again this year. So there's a lot going on. We're going to have 3 championship events over I guess 2. With women's basketball and indoor track and field, but it's 3. I mean, 3 days worth of, or 2 days.
2 days worth, but you've
3
got,
events. Yeah,
there's 2 different sports going on in the field.
Yeah,
now.
that's
So
true.
You've got the men's meet and the women's meet.
That's
They're
true.
two separate meets.
That's true.
So you've got 3 championships
Yeah,
here.
so there's 3 championships going on campus this weekend, and so it's going to be really busy. If you're coming out to watch, I would urge people to come as early as possible.
Parking's going to be
Sparse. Yeah. Today, this Friday, actually, they're starting the championships for indoor track and field in a few hours. About 3:30, I think, is when it starts here. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a wild weekend. And then the action on Saturday is at 10:30. So that is going to start 10:30 in the morning.
So don't forget to show up
Yeah,
early, find your parking spot,
early.
get your big bag of popcorn.
And the basketball game's at 4 o'clock.
Go between the facilities to watch a little bit, and make sure you check in on your Swarm Central app.
Yes, and I think
Get your
that
points.
actually that's part of my plan. I'm going to hear pretty early, even though I'm just broadcasting the women's game. I'm obviously not doing track and field, but I'm going to try to get here as early as I can on Saturday because I want to watch some track and field too, just to take it all in. So yeah, there's a lot going on campus this weekend, and after this though, it starts to lighten up a lot.
It will lighten up a little bit. Yep.
Yeah, and then we'll have a big break before we get into baseball and softball, which will be the next time we'll be at home. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's all coming to like I don't want to say a forefront, but to a conclusion.
Yeah, but it does. I mean, you go 100 miles an hour for months.
Yep.
And then you hit the end of February, and it just all comes to a screeching halt.
Yep.
You know, and this year, hopefully the weather cooperates where we get into games a little bit more. But, you know, in years past, it's typical to finish this last weekend of February.
Right.
And you don't have anything at home until the middle of April.
Right.
You know, you're off for almost 2 months.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's really strange. And we talk about it every year. There's a big sprint basically starting in fall all the way through winter. And then once the winter season starts, we usually have about 4 to 6 weeks where we're just sort of hanging in the wind,
right,
waiting for Mother Nature to cooperate. Now this year, with the way that the weather has been, it might be a little bit sooner than that. But that's generally speaking how it goes, and we still have, you know, the rest of February and all of April to go. So I'm not gonna, or March, I should say, all of March, and possibly April,
right,
before we get into the spring season. So I'm not putting. I'm not counting my chickens before they're hatched. But
you've lived
right
here long
now,
enough to know.
Yeah. Right now, hopefully, we'll be able to get a lot of home games in for the spring, because that's been the year that we have. That's the season that we have the biggest bugaboo with.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be a fun weekend. So
it's going to be a fun weekend, and it also gives us an opportunity to sit down with a special guest, which we will do in our next segment. Our roundtable will feature the commissioner of the Upper Midwest Athletic Conference, Corey Borchardt, who is going to be kind enough to stop in and spend a few minutes with us.
And he's going to be busy up on campus this weekend.
He's going to be busy around campus this weekend, so we're glad we could snag him for a few minutes. So we'll take a timeout. We'll be back with Commissioner Borchardt right after this. You're watching Eye of the Swarm.
Find your passion. Find your people. Find your purpose. Find your superior.
We're back on the roundtable segment of this week's Eye of the Swarm, and I guess one of the benefits you get by having to host the Indoor Track and Field Championships every single year
in 2 days,
is you get the commissioner that shows up in your house every single year. So we're very fortunate to have Corey Borchardt from the UMAC join us. And
well, it's a regularly scheduled, I think, segment for us, because we've done interviews with you how many times?
Just about every year.
Yeah,
at least about once a year.
Yeah, just about once a year, I think.
Typically, it's earlier in the year.
Right.
You know, we don't usually build it around the track championships, but
no,
this year just kind of swung that way.
Just swung out. Yeah, usually it's earlier in the year, and we usually do it pretty early. Usually in the fall, I think. We've had it in the fall.
Usually around the soccer tournament time.
Yeah,
exactly.
Time,
I think
the last couple times, I think, were during the soccer tournaments. I think. I might be wrong. I don't know.
So we can blame him for bringing winter. Yeah. Because Corey's trip up.
How was the drive up, by the way? Let's just start there.
The first half was all right. The second half, about Moose Lake, started to get roads weren't quite as great, but it wasn't too bad. So
okay, yeah, it was. It's always interesting to hear people drive up because Ryan Coleman from D3 Hoops was here on Wednesday. I hadn't seen him in a long time, and I was coming down and I walked out and he saw me and remembered me, so I went over and talked to him and he said, just a beautiful day for a drive from the city. And I said, well, we're glad to have you here, Ryan. Yeah. And big smile on his face. And now, so I'm kind of replaying this now in my head now that you're here to see how your experience was versus because he was driving up when it was sunny and nice and
right.
Yeah. We tend to always have snow during the indoor championship. I feel like most years we get at least some snow, if not a lot of snow this weekend. So.
It's supposed to, though. It's supposed to mellow out again.
It is.
It's supposed to warm up. So by the time you have to head home tomorrow, it should all be.
Yeah.
This should be gone.
Yeah.
So
This has been a bizarre year, though.
Baseball games this weekend.
Yeah. We were talking about that in our first
Crazy.
segment.
Is this a first? Is this the earliest for you?
I think there was like the second week of February. I think there was a year or two where there was some baseball games on the turf fields in the Twin Cities. But this is maybe a week after that, 7 to 10 days past that. Otherwise,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, especially outdoor. I mean, it's one thing to play if you're playing at UMAC,
Right.
because that's indoor.
Right.
But it's another thing to play outdoor
Yeah.
in February.
We've had all these
And-
teams practicing
I was
outside.
going to say, I think the difference this year is just practicing. Because even that year, if I remember right, or year or two where we did get some games in early February, it was just like a few days of really nice weather. They
Right.
could get out and play a game or two, whereas this February, I know a lot of teams are practicing outdoors, which is crazy.
Yeah, it is nuts.
Between
It really is.
baseball, softball, and tennis, here anyway,
Yeah.
they've all been
They've all
outside
had-
since the end
yeah.
of January.
Yep.
They've all been practicing outside. Today's the first day that we've seen the white stuff fall from the sky in probably about 6 weeks.
Yeah, and my kid was thrilled. I opened the big curtain and he's eating his breakfast and he's just like, snow!
I
He
know,
sounded like Will Ferrell and Elf. when,
All right. Yeah.
Santa! That was kind of what he was like
yeah.
today.
For some reason, especially up here, it just doesn't seem right if it's not a little white, at least in January, February. So.
Well, I mean, it's February. I mean, why would
It was raining in January.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and there's been some talk of more rain coming down the line, I think, but it's been a wild year. I mean, the departure from temperatures. I was watching KBJR last night, and they were saying that we're plus 25 to 30 in some places.
It's crazy.
In terms of where we should be.
Yep.
Today is more on brand of where we should be at this time of year. And,
Yep.
Now I'm beginning to think that the possibilities for a real cold snap like we usually get.
I don't know if it's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen now because we're getting in that part of the year now where we might get more snow, but the possibilities of it getting really cold are starting to look like pretty few here, pretty slim.
Yeah, that's all my conversations with their baseball, softball, tennis coaches was, this is great, but we know there might still be.
Yeah.
But the later we get into February, almost early March now, I think there's a sense maybe we're going to
Maybe it
even
will.
not have that
we
late
might,
snow
we
and
might
stretch.
dodge it.
Yeah.
But what we could run into then is the soggy spring
Yeah.
where nonstop rain.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it
At
does
some
make you
point, we're going to
curious.
get hit.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it does make you like it. There's going to be storms. There always is. Inclement weather. That's just part of life up here. But it's just what form of inclement weather are we going to have? Which is why everybody plays on turf just about now, is because of the inclement weather thing.
Yeah.
It's been a really strange year. And we've been talking about it a lot on the podcast, just because you haven't seen a winter quite like this one.
Yeah.
In terms of weather.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, it almost doesn't feel like winter at all. I've been saying that a lot of times. I
Right.
mean, we're playing winter sports right now, but that's my only indication that it's winter.
Yes. Exactly.
That's all. That's the calendar says it's winter.
Yeah.
The sports say it's winter. Sports calendar says it's winter.
Yeah.
And outdoor doesn't say that. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, with the Division III legislative changes where, teams can use days throughout the year more. Baseball, softball starting earlier, tennis starting even earlier. This year, it just feels like we started spring sports after Christmas
Right.
almost because weather cooperated, the new rules and playing rules, they can get out and do, practice earlier. And so it
Right,
just feels
yep,
like we're
yep.
going to have about a 6-month spring sports season in a way.
We talked about this a little bit too with a couple coaches on the show.
Sure.
What took so long for that to happen in Division III? Because Division I basically is
They've been
it's wide open. You can
yeah.
do whatever. Division II isn't nearly as restrictive as Division III. What took Division III so long to say we should change this because it would really benefit the athletes?
Sure. I think 2 parts to it. I think the first part is probably rooted more in a Division III philosophy, history, or historical perspective, and the values of Division III, trying to ensure student athletes can be well-rounded in other pursuits as well, even beyond athletics, whether that's internships or other activities, fine arts, or other campus opportunities that they want to be a part of, studying abroad even, or those types of things. So I think there's always been a little bit more protection of trying to stay in that middle ground of continuing to develop our athletic programs, but ensure the athletes still have a holistic experience in some capacity. Mm-hmm. So I think that was always a part of maybe slower to get to where we are now. And then I think the second part is the staffing and facility piece. At Division III now continues to obviously facilities develop and campuses have athletic facilities that can accommodate so many sports going at the same time and
Right.
able to support it that way. And staffing as well, obviously, has continued to evolve in Division III. There's still maybe some campuses where individuals hold 2, 3, 4 titles, but more and more, it's full-time coaches or full-time administrators, athletic trainers, more are added, sports information, athletic communication staffs are expanded. So I think that was the other part of it where Division III has historically been a little bit more guarded of just can our campus handle this if we start having 18, 20, 22 sports going, 24 sports, some campuses, more or less in season, maybe not all playing games, but practicing at different levels at the same time. Can our kind of support system handle that? So those are the two things that jump out to me. Are there a lot of positives to it too? I think absolutely. I think the coach contact and just the ability for coaches to stay connected with their athletes hopefully helps in a lot of ways too. So a lot of good with it as well.
Because we talked with Melissa last week about it, and it's so difficult for the spring sports especially because they get here, you go through eligibility, you have your non-trad, and now for 4 months, stay away from me.
Yeah.
And this really opened the door, for, I think, especially for the spring sports, to be able to have.
Well,
you don't lose them.
Yes.
Well, I think also for some of the sports that are split, where you can play, in the fall and in the spring, like men's and women's golf, men's and women's tennis, where you have that split season where you can play some matches, not maybe the bulk of your schedule, unless you're golf in the beginning, and then you can also get stuff on the back end. But there's that 4-month window in there where there just isn't a lot happening, and then you have to kind of try to figure out ways to kind of keep yourself sharp.
Yeah.
And that makes it a little bit more. Also, I think that legislation helps because you can have those bridge over days now where you can take those days and you can say, okay, we're not going to be in competition during that time, but we can still do these things and try to keep ourselves as sharp as we can. Because for instance, like for men's golf, they win the conference tournament. They're off to the NCAA, tournament or the meet, but they've got that 4 months in between where they're not really doing anything,
right?
And so where you get those extra days where you can now come in, you can have team stuff, you can work on some stuff, and if there's anything that needs to be tweaked or anything, you can work on that. So
I think, like you said too, the spring sports freshmen or first year students, I think that's critical that they can have more contact and just engagement, connection with the team, with the coach to help them get settled and grounded and supported, get college life figured out that first semester. And then on the other side, I think for fall sports, a lot of times while our teams do things in the spring previously or historically, it's not quite the same, and it takes till usually March or April with our weather. So again, there's a long gap. You end your soccer, volleyball, football season in early November.
Right.
It's a long stretch before you start doing some team activities again previously before the rule change. So now I think those fall sports too, just the semester end doesn't necessarily equate, okay, we won't see them for 2-3 months, and has helped them to, from what I've heard or conversations I've had.
Taking the weather conversation we had earlier into account, has there been discussions? I mean, I know there has been, but is there any traction to discussions of splitting seasons for the spring sports where they can get some games in the fall?
Yeah, yes. It just seems like it's never going to get over that hurdle or that mountain to actually come to fruition. But there's definitely been a discussion of, what if you could play up to 10 games in the fall?
Right.
I think a couple of the roadblocks that come up typically in the conversation, how do you wrestle with then for championships and selections in the spring? Okay, this team won 10 games in the fall, but the 1 or 2 pitchers that won all those games transferred out, or they're not even there now in the second semester. And so now the selection committee for that sport is going, how do we evaluate or wrestle with that? They won those games, they deserve them.
Yeah.
So I think that's a part that comes up. And then the second part, I think, is that facility and support services as well. Typically, not all, campuses, but a lot of times number of sports in the fall is the largest already, going, 6, 8, 10, 12. So then to add, maybe another baseball, softball, and another 5 to 10 dates to that. I think some are concerned just athletic training support, athletic communication, ability to handle that. Again, those are the two things that typically come up that seem to kind of pump the brakes or slow down the conversation. The other interesting part of that conversation, there's some parts of Division III that would say flip and put baseball, softball in the fall, soccer in the spring, which I think for September, October, agree. I think the challenge becomes, thinking of playing baseball, softball postseason in November.
Yeah.
In some parts of Division III membership, the South and Texas and the West probably is just fine, but kind of the Midwest to Mideast, Northeast, that's probably not a fun thought.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, though,
because a cold baseball game.
You have to realize that, part of the struggle with having baseball and softball in the spring is simply our location. Mm-hmm. It isn't just a question of, and when you're making these kind of decisions, you have to take the whole into account. Most of the country is able to play baseball earlier than we are, simply because, and in the spring it makes sense for them because, everybody else is, they don't have the winters that we have. They don't have the chance maybe for inclement weather that's going to, put things out for a while. Yeah. But up here, there's a chance we could get, flurries as, mid-April into early May.
Oh, right. Yeah. I have shoveled snow for a conference softball tournament multiple times.
Right. Yeah. So. But that is, but that is a unique, aspect of playing baseball and softball and having outdoor track and field in the upper Midwest. Yeah. You don't get that in the Southwest. You don't get it in the Southeast. You don't get it on the West Coast. You don't even get it necessarily Northeast as much. Mm-hmm. So, I can understand, from our perspective, why we want to, have those conversations. But for the other schools, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they're fine as is. If you're playing Division III or Division II baseball in any of those other places, you have a field available to you all year. You can go out there and just, have batting practice and throw around and all that kind of stuff. We're the ones that are sort of limited in that regard. And so that's one of those where you have to sort of weigh, those kind of things against other factors as well.
Yeah.
And that's a big one. That's probably the big one.
Right.
When it comes to having these conversations, for us, in our location. So
yeah. I think twice in the last 10 years, we've had years or seasons where one or two conferences in the South, like the USA South and Division III, and another conference, were finishing their conference tournament before we were playing our first conference games. Because some of those conferences typically do their conference tournaments in mid-April. They've already had a good stretch of regular season.
Yeah.
And so I remember specifically 2 years where we were literally getting our first conference games in that weekend, and they were finishing
That's crazy.
their tournaments.
But that makes sense again because they're able to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
From a scheduling standpoint, we simply can't.
Right.
Yeah.
That's never going to happen here.
Yep.
So there are those factors that are out of your control. Yeah. And when you're talking about the whole of D3, I don't know, different states, for instance, in high school. Some play a spring season for baseball and softball. Some play a fall. Mm-hmm. Some play in the summer. Mm-hmm. If they have to. So that's when the real sort of difficulties that comes up when you're talking about trying to figure out a format and a schedule that works for the entire landscape of Division III.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets tough.
Yep.
Internally, has there been an appetite for that or no?
The conference conversations, when we discuss those elements, the biggest concern has been the staffing facilities ability if we start adding more sports in the fall, or that tends to be the first kind of red flag, if you will, that's put up, or needing to have more dialogue on. I think coaching-wise, coaches are very open to, what are other options, what are better options, but just administratively and support staff-wise, that's what starts the conversation usually.
Sure. Let's shift gears a little bit. Kind of give us the state of the union, I guess,
sure,
of the conference.
Yeah. So I usually, when I get asked that question, say, at least in the last year or so, we're doing okay. I think higher education right now in general is an interesting point with the demographic, the cliff coming, and just the pure number of 18 to 23-year-olds will be at one of the lowest numbers in really the history of the U.S. There's certainly going to be challenges ahead. There's challenges now. So I won't sit here and tell you that we have 8 thriving institutions as far as full members.
Right.
I don't think there's many conferences that probably could say that all of their members are thriving right now. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we're unique in that aspect or alone in that regard. But a lot of our institutions are doing some really good things to try to be just creative, diversifying, trying to help them in terms of unique programs, adding different programs that hopefully can combat some of the demographic challenges. And just higher ed's a flooded market. There's so many options now.
Right.
So I think our institutions are doing a really good job trying to look at 5 years out, 10 years out. How do we put ourselves in a position to be sustainable, and that goes beyond athletics. So I'm kind of answering your question or starting it beyond just the athletics lens. But we're doing okay. I think competitively wise, again, through the fall sports and certainly the basketball season, we're continuing to show that our top teams can compete well with people around us, regionally, nationally. So I think competitiveness-wise, we're doing well and continue to make progress there, particularly some sports, obviously, over others. But I think right now we're in this situation in terms of kind of the conference. Some schools are trying to figure out, can we add sports still? And, it helps enrollment. Will it help us in other ways? Do we need to just support our current sport offerings more and, do further in terms of institutional support for what we're doing now? I think that's kind of the sense that I get in terms of institutions really wrestling with where to put limited resources, which every campus is having to battle and navigate. There's only so many resources, so what's most strategic or effective for us, athletics and beyond?
Well, I think a lot of people, because schools will look at it and go, add football. 100 students. Yeah. Chances are you're not going to have 100 students, and it's a very expensive sport. So then, okay, that one's not going to work, so what's the next one? You don't want to add just to add. There has to be a strategic piece to it, and it has to be something that can be sustainable, because we get it here all the time, bring back football. I don't think that would be a good thing for us currently. That's my own personal opinion, so that doesn't – I'm speaking for nobody else within the department or the university. That is my personal opinion. I don't think that would be a good move. I don't think that would be a smart move. But it's a very strategic thing that a lot of schools are having to navigate. And I would imagine that, especially for schools in our region, in this conference, what happened to Finlandia was really the alarm that went, okay, this is hitting close to home now. Because that's a school that's essentially in our footprint, and that just about everybody had on their schedule in multiple sports. So I think that had to have been kind of the one that hit the alarm in the room and said, okay, we have to really be smart about this.
Yeah, and I think if you open up Chronicle of Higher Education or obviously other higher ed news outlets or tickers, it feels like almost every day or every week there's a new institution that's announced they're closing or merging, or some way, shape, or form kind of transitioning to essentially not what they are. So it not just Finlandia, but I think even just regionally, nationally, you certainly feel that every day, every week. And I think one of the things that our presidents and chancellors have been talking about a lot at their meetings is all of our institutions, athletics is student-athlete population is a very critical part of their overall enrollment. So if you look at our 8 schools, there's a range from about 28 kind of mid-20s% all the way up to even 60+% of the total students are student athletes.
That's crazy.
So and I would say that number across all 8 institutions continues to increase because the general student population is flatlining or decreasing and our student athlete populations are increasing.
Right.
So as that number increases, I think our presidents and chancellors have to really navigate, how do they keep utilizing athletics, and it adds so much to their campus in a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of positives. The return on it in a lot of measurable and unmeasurable ways is really good, but at the same time, they want to be careful and sensitive. We aren't an athlete campus, or our school is only here because
we're
of
not
athletics.
A sports academy.
Right. Yeah. You start getting 60-70+% athlete population, and obviously I think you've got some other challenges ahead of you. So our presidents and chancellor group has really wrestled with where's that sweet spot. We want to keep utilizing athletics and supporting it well. At the same time, we need to see our general student population keep going up as well.
From a conference standpoint, then I guess that segues into sports offerings, and from the conference standpoint, what's the look for growth there? Are there sports that the conference is looking at going, okay, that could be a championship sport in the UMAC that it currently is not?
Sure. I would say right now, and based on our recent president, chancellor, and athletic director meetings, I see us staying right where we are. We've got 18, sports, and there was discussion of other sports. Lacrosse, obviously, typically comes up. Wrestling, men's volleyball, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of our institutions individually maybe still add a wrestling, men's or women's wrestling, or men's volleyball or lacrosse. But as a conference, our president's chancellor said, okay, we're not in position. We would rather fund and support our current offerings more, do some things enhancement-wise to improve our current offerings instead of adding more. So I don't see us dropping sports or eliminating sports from a conference perspective, which is great as well. But it seems like for the foreseeable future, I think we'll be at the 18 that we're at.
What is the kind of the trigger number, I guess? How many schools would have to add, say, a lacrosse for the conference to go, okay, we're going to make that a championship sport?
Sure. Two parts of that. First, from an NCAA standpoint, to get an automatic qualifier, you'd have to have 6 at least in your conference, but you do need at least 4 core members, or it becomes a single sport conference. Obviously, there's some hockey single sport conferences or things like that. So we really would need 4 core full members for lacrosse before I think we'd look at putting it in our UMAC umbrella. Our conference bylaws dictate to have a conference championship, at least 50% of the membership has to sponsor it. So right now, just with 8 full members, that number kind of aligns anyways, is the same. But those are kind of the 2 numbers or figures you'll look at just in terms of legislatively that we'd have to be utilizing.
Wrestling's interesting to me because in the 90s and 2000s, no sport got cut more than wrestling. The story that always sticks out in my mind is Nebraska-Omaha had just won, I think, their 4th consecutive national championship, and then we're told right after, your sport's dead.
Yep.
And so it's interesting that you're starting to see some schools go, wrestling could be an option here.
Yeah.
Because it was the sport that just got murdered in the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah.
I mean, it happened in St. Olaf when I was
Happened here.
Yeah. And wrestling right now, if you look at the numbers, just in terms of state high school leagues, across either the NFHS, the whole National Federation of High Schools numbers, or state by state, wrestling's women and men is one of the fastest growing sports, or right now one of the largest growing sports amongst all sports. So I think that's really opened the eyes of some, institutional leaders and campus administrators to say, okay, at the high school level, this is really growing. Maybe we really do need to rethink this. And even within our conference, Northland at one point had really strong men's wrestling program and some very passionate alumni that are, still a part of events there. Minnesota Morris had men's and women's wrestling, very, very strong wrestling programs at one point. So even within our conference, there's a little bit of wrestling history, probably less and lesser known just as time goes on, but at one point, some pretty strong programs.
We still get it here.
Sure.
Because if you go back to the 1960s, Superior was a wrestling power.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And I know in the WIAC, the Wrestling Coach of the Year is still named after Mertz.
Yeah.
And Mertz is in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, Wrestling Coaches Hall of Fame. Pretty much any wrestling Hall of Fame he could be in, he is in. So it is a sport that was a very, very big sport here.
Right, yeah.
And it coincided with, Mertz was coaching football and wrestling, so he'd recruit players to play football and wrestle.
Sure.
Right.
And so he was able to build 2 programs that way. Yeah. But there still is, it's been gone 30-plus years here, but there still is a sliver of that alumni base that once a year, they get vocal. And now when you see some schools that are within close proximity to here that are bringing wrestling back or adding it, they kind of start to speak up and go, hey, how about us?
Right.
How about us?
Yeah. Well, and our neighboring conferences, I think, sponsor wrestling pretty heavily, too. I mean, if you look at the MIAC and the WIAC, they both have very viable wrestling teams in their respective conferences. I mean, Augsburg, when I was in college, was a huge national power.
Still is.
Yeah, and they're still a national power. The WIAC puts together some really good wrestling squads as well. So you're talking about an area where wrestling is a big deal geographically. And that the Upper Midwest is known as something of a wrestling area.
Yeah.
If you spend any time in Iowa,
I was just going to say add the American River Conference to
Minnesota
your list
and Wisconsin as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really good wrestlers that come out of that area. Iowa's won so many national championships in wrestling. University of Minnesota's had some national championship level teams. Wisconsin's been highly competitive. That's at the D1 level. But if you filter all the way down, I mean, with Augsburg being a multi-time national champion as well, and then you throw in the other athletes, wrestling athletes that have gone to other WIAC and MIAC schools. I mean, there's a thirst for it for sure.
Yeah.
There always has been, and so that's something that probably it does bear watching, in the future to see where that goes.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I mean, that's sort of that's a whole another athletic area that probably is worth exploring at some point anyway.
And I think you hit on the regional just strength, but also there is just regional numbers in terms of WIAC programs, Iowa or ARC programs, a couple in the MIAC. I think for institutional leaders, that's a big part as they look at a sport, potentially adding how far do we have to travel?
Right.
Where can we go to get games?
Yeah.
Just from a pure feasibility standpoint and budgeting and financial reality. So wrestling in that regard is probably a little more attractive than a lacrosse or maybe some other sports because there just is more regional programs that could fill a schedule.
With Minnesota high school recognizing men's volleyball, how quickly do you think that growth filters into college?
I think it's going to come quick. I've been a part of a lot of conversations and meetings just in the last 2-3 months. Even some, like I said, some of our schools are definitely looking at it. I know there's a couple of MIAC schools that are looking at it. I think rightfully so with men's volleyball, the one piece becomes just Title IX considerations and institutions needing to do their deep dive and feasibility study to make sure they're in a position that they could add it. If they're just adding men's volleyball, they need to make sure that they're still Title IX compliant and considering that, of course, which is important. So, but it's the Minnesota State High School League, and then Wisconsin already is, and growing there a little bit more towards the Madison, Milwaukee area.
Yeah, you get down south, those schools down there have it, Carthage and Carroll and all them.
Yeah, but I think it's even creeping kind of mid-Wisconsin and Minnesota, so it's coming. The train is coming faster, I think, than some people maybe realize, but I know particularly for some of our schools, it's the Title IX piece that they're really looking at to make sure.
Let's talk a little bit about growth in a different sense from the conference standpoint, because it's common knowledge that things are very fluid in terms of conferences these days, especially if you look at the Division I ranks, and that does filter down, and there is conference movement and schools leaving and moving up to Division I or II or whatever is going on. How does the UMAC view all that right now? And I know you can't get into the deep weeds on that, but where is the conference looking in terms of expansion and growth?
Sure. Yeah, I think I've probably said this with you before when we've been together, but our presidents and chancellors remain very committed to expansion philosophically. We're very open to that. Obviously it needs to be a good fit, the right fit in a lot of different areas or considerations, but just from a starting point, pure philosophical conversations, we really want to look to continue to expand. So that hasn't changed in recent years, and obviously, as you noted, the landscape, I think, will continue to be more fluid, even in Division III. We do have an application that our president's chancellors will be reviewing and acting on later this spring. So that's exciting. I don't know where it's going to land, where the president's chancellors will land. We've had a lot of meetings already, a lot more meetings to go and conversations and dialogue. But potentially, adding our first full member since we added Wisconsin Superior would be coming. If we did admit into that particular institution, it would be, fall of 25 at the earliest. Okay. So as far as schedules and competition, it wouldn't be next year, but it would be the fall of 25. But we also are engaged in conversation with some other institutions as well. It's a fascinating process in conversations. Rightfully so, the first 20 questions or things that a president chancellor wants to look at are probably much different than the first 20 things that an athletic director or coach maybe wants to consider or look at a school. And so, membership opportunities are always interesting, and there's really no two are alike, if you will, when you work with institutions, just what it could look like. And so it'll be an interesting couple of months to see where we land with the application in hand, and then from there what other doors hopefully open. But we're going to continue, absolutely not shy about it, if you will, to keep trying to expand our full membership. It's
a process. I want to say 2013 is when we started the conversations.
Yeah.
And became a member in 2015.
Yeah, so it's about 2 years.
It's a process.
Yeah.
It's not something that happens overnight. It definitely does not go quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember very initial conversation with Steve, and Julius was chancellor still at that time, kind of towards the end. But
Right.
Yeah, it's funny to think about. I mean, really, who I started with in terms of interacting, engaging with from Superior, much different. Of course, it's been a while, but
Right.
than the institutional leadership now. But you're absolutely right. It doesn't happen overnight, and as they should, institutional leaders, presidents, chancellors, cabinet, they want to do their due diligence and to make that significant of a decision, particularly if it's a school that's in a conference that they've been in for a long time. That's going to look different than maybe somebody that's independent, or they're trying to
Right.
go from NAIA to Division III or some other national organization. It's going to look different.
Yeah, it was very different leaving a WIEC where you've been for 100 years.
Right, yeah, yeah.
They just celebrate the centennial, and there's a part of me that sees humor in the USA Today thing,
Yeah.
because it was the conference that never changes and all this stuff, and then like 6 weeks later, we're going to leave.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Well, I mean, in the landscape, we're seeing it now, and this is across of all of college athletics, in my opinion. You're seeing it where, especially at Division I level, and all of those discussions that are taking place there, that's all.
That's money.
That's money based.
That's
yeah.
money driven.
But it shows you again, though, that there is fluidity happening right now, where teams are moving around quite a bit. And I know that these conversations are also happening at the Division II level in terms of who's going where. UMD's conference lost a member last year in Upper Iowa. Bailed, and now they're over in the Great Lakes conference. So that's a Division II example. And then in 2015 when we left the WIAC, created quite a stir, and St. Scholastica then making a jump. So there is that fluidity question where teams do move around, the schools do move around a little bit. And I think right now the big thing is a lot of these schools seem to be looking for some level of stability. Especially if they're in an independent school. Finlandia was a chart. Well, it was sort of a satellite member in certain conferences for certain sports. But there is kind of a stability factor as well, though, I think, in being in a conference, because it gives you a little bit more of a reliable kind of backup system. A little bit, you've got more support internally. If you're part of something where you're grouping instead of just trying to fly it on your own. So I imagine the Division III level, that's going to become kind of common, is to see where teams are moving around a little bit here. Yeah,
and really even Division III in terms of the Northeast part of the country, kind of into the Mideast, there's been a lot of conference membership changes. And I think you're going to see in the Midwest more changes in fluidity than we did for a long time. Some of the conferences in the Midwest, the upper Midwest, have been in existence for a long time and had very little changes, but there's starting to be some change, and I think you're going to see even more change in the Midwest, even in leagues that historically maybe have had not as much change. But really, Division III, particularly some parts of the country already, are having a lot of membership changes. And I think, to your point, it starts with recruiting, right? So institutions want tools that they can use to help them recruit and be successful in recruiting, both quality athletes and quantitatively. And so I think that's where that conference home provides tools in terms of simple as awards and then championship access and NCAA, championship access. And that really becomes, I think, a critical piece for schools as they recruit, needing to feel like they have the tools to do that. Whereas Finlandia's situation or other institutions, if they're independent, that was a tough life to recruit, just in terms of trying to convince an 18-year-old or 17-year-old. That's a different type of sell than somebody that can offer 3, 4, 5 other tools.
Right. Yep.
Can we talk about the network?
Sure, absolutely.
The UMAC network and what could potentially be coming down the road. We had a meeting about that this week among the athletic communication staff. So what can you tell us about potentially the future of the UMAC network?
Yeah, I'll actually add to it, and we are excited. We'll be announcing, formally or unveiling, I should say, in July, a new logo and a total rebrand for our conference. So very, very excited about that. And I think, it would be a nice touch with it, would be the UMAC network launching at the same time. And so we're excited that hopefully we can make that happen. Still some meetings to go, and obviously our institutional administrators need to still make some final decisions, but there seems to be growing support and excitement around it. So, I think it would help our, going back to recruiting, identity for the conference. I think there's some positives of doing that and having our own network. And And, we recognize we wouldn't be the first. There's certainly others, but I think there's some ideas that we have, and Jordan, our assistant commissioner, that we would try to capitalize doing it, maybe some things that other leagues aren't doing or some layers to it that we could do to still set us apart a little bit when we launch it and if we're able to do that. So I'm personally very, very excited for this summer and the potential of doing the rebrand launch and then also the network as well. I think would be a really kind of 1-2 punch together. Makes a lot of sense.
What was the strategy and the thinking behind the rebrand?
Yeah, I think a couple of elements really drove it or pushed it. I think first, our current logo and elements and everything that goes with kind of brand, I guess, if you will, is a little bit outdated, I guess, in itself. But there were, I think there was a sense in terms of it was created in kind of the birth, if you will, or infant stage of the UMAC. And now maybe, a sense that we're in a different chapter in the life cycle, if you will, of a conference and time to kind of do a refresh, if you will, or a little bit of a makeover. And so I think part of it was simply just it felt like it was time. And I know there's value in organizations that have the same logo for 100 years, and those types of things too are certainly positive. But it felt like an opportunity in this chapter of our life cycle to do an update and to utilize it in that way. I think second, as you'll see in July when we unveil it, I think there's a little bit more just strategy behind it, more of a why behind it, whereas our initial and current logo and related elements, candidly, I don't think there was a lot of thought put in, to when they were created.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And it's worked for us. It's been fine. So certainly want to be respectful of those that were a part of creating it and launching it when they did. But I think this time there's just a lot more thought behind it and a tagline too that I think we can build on. And so I'm excited to see. Hopefully we can leverage it and utilize it more just in our social media platforms and obviously digital website things as well. But the end goal really is that hopefully it helps our schools recruit.
Right.
I think we'll do some things with it in terms of video and social media and things that hopefully helps our schools in the end with their institutional recruiting efforts. That's really the lens that we look through a lot with the conference in terms of when we say, okay, should we do this? What's the value of it? Can it help? We always start with, does it help our schools recruit? If it does, then let's keep talking about it.
This whole conversation really shows that there's nothing static here.
No.
I mean, there are so many moving parts when you are dealing just at the conference level, but then when you get a little more granular within the individual members and everything.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You must be exhausted.
People ask, fortunate to be in this position now, 16 years, which is hard to believe, but people ask, well, what's changed or, how's it different? I think the biggest element is the rate at which the presidents, chancellors, and the athletic directors are changing now. And it's probably not a lot different than other industries, just people don't stay in the same positions as long as they do, and life has changed in that way. So when the people around the tables with you that help make the decisions and are critical to making decisions change at a higher rate, that's a different element. The presidents, chancellors that were all in place when I was hired have all moved on. Some schools have had 2, 3, 4, presidents, chancellors in that time. I think one figured out this past summer, I think it was like 50-some ADs that I've worked with, in my time. So when the people changes at a higher rate, I think that impacts a little bit just in terms of the speed of decisions and, how much historical perspective you have to add in. And, there's some times where we're sitting around a table making a decision. I go, we were just talking about this 3 years ago. Why are we talking about this? And then I have to remind myself, oh, yeah, half to 3/4 of the people weren't around the table when we had this conversation 3 years ago. So in terms of exhausting, I still love what I do. It's a great, just we have awesome people in our conference and really enjoy it. But that's the piece that's probably changed the most in my time.
I can't imagine that.
Well,
just not having that kind of continuity. It's weird when you lose a coach.
Right.
And we've been very fortunate the last few years. We haven't had
We're
a ton
stable.
of turnover with
We've been
coaches,
stable,
Which is great.
But
Absolutely.
being in that chair, I mean,
We'll just
drop it down to an AD level, and if you're constantly turning over these coaches and everything, how do you get any traction on anything? Because you constantly have to kind of hit a reset and try to bring them all back, and you have to deal with that so much. That's unbelievable.
Well, and the other thing is that we're living in a changing world. I mean, when Corey takes over 16 years ago, there's no social media yet.
Yeah.
I mean, the internet is still there, but we're not into social media and graphics and Twitter and Facebook, and all these things didn't exist. So now all of a sudden you've got that.
No
aspect.
podcast?
Yeah, podcast didn't exist. So you would, there was things called coaches shows back then,
Right.
but that was it. And
Over the air radio.
right, yeah, and that was for Division I almost exclusively.
Right.
And now, with the way the world has changed, you have to keep up with it, and it makes it that much more. You just the world is changing at all times, and so there's always fluidity to a situation. We talk about the conference memberships and the schools coming and going or wherever they're going to end up, but it's also we're living in the digital age now. Digital media has now become such a huge thing, and that's such a big push now for things like the UMAC network.
Right.
And that's another thing. That's a conversation you wouldn't have had even 5 years ago.
Right.
Now all of a sudden it's a forefront question for every conference at every level. So yeah, I mean there's a lot going on all the time.
Yeah. What's your, one of the things that's obviously hitting Division III, and we've talked about to some degree, but the conversations are going to increase further. What are your thoughts on, conferences that are going to like a paywall for all, contests, regular season, championships, so anything?
That's going to be interesting. We did it here. We did it here with men's hockey exclusively because they were on a different network than the rest of the sports were. Yeah. And we saw a definite drop in viewership when we went to the paywall.
Interesting.
And as soon as we removed it, it went right back up. It went right back up. So figure if you go behind a paywall, you're probably going to lose a third of what your numbers are currently. And I think you'll get that certain slice of the population that just goes, oh, I'm just not going to watch that.
Sure.
I'll watch something on TikTok. I'm not going to watch this. But you will have the other demographic that, if I want to see it, I guess I got to do it, because there is something to be said for giving your product away. Yeah. There's something to be said for not doing that. And I think it's just a matter of time before schools across the board are charging for these things. And there's going to be that initial outrage, that, oh my God, they're making us pay for this. Well, if you were coming to the game, we'd have to buy a ticket anyway. Yeah. So it's no different. Yeah. It's no different. And I think you're just going to get to that point where across the board, I could be wrong. Again, just my opinion, nobody else's. But I think you could get to that point where across the board, everything's going to have a paywall.
Yeah.
It's like newspapers. Yeah. They give you 3 free articles now, and then you have to buy your digital subscription. It's going to be the same thing here. We'll give you a game to watch, or we'll give you 8 minutes of a game.
Right.
But after that, you're going to have to pay for this.
Yeah.
I also broadcast for UMD, and they've been throwing that idea around. The SIC network. The way that they're running it right now, they're only doing playoff games where you have to pay for a paywall. The anticipation, I think, is that, or the expectation, I should say, is that everything will go behind a paywall at some point. I just don't know when that's going to be. So they're kind of experimenting right now, but I think it is something that's going to be coming up. I do wonder how the public will take it in, though, just because of, Division I does that, but it's Division I, so you expect that, right? So because these are full scholarship athletes, some of them are going to play professionally somewhere someday, probably. Division II, I don't know what the numbers are. This is the first year that the NSIC network has done this, where they've been, if you're watching a postseason game, you have to pay. Because regular season games are still free. You can just tune in and watch them.
Sure.
But there is a plan in place to make everything behind a paywall, and I don't know what's going to happen there in terms of how that's going to look. A Division III, my concern is going down. The further down you go, the less people are going to be willing to pay in for it, simply because it's Division II and Division III. We're not watching professional athletes. We're not watching potential players we're going to be seeing playing at the highest levels down the road.
Right.
These are not big revenue schools, so why am I having to pay any revenue at all to watch a game otherwise? I think your point is a good one in terms of, just the fact that, if you're going to go to the game, you're still going to have to pay to get in. But there are certain people who watch online because they don't want to pay to go to a game.
Right.
And so that's where the kind of the tension lies a little bit. But to be honest with you, I don't know what the full landscape is going to look like. I think down the road, eventually everyone will go to a paywall. And I wonder what that will do, though, in terms of viewership long term, because everything's becoming more expensive, not less.
Right.
So, then there's going to have to be some, conversations had there in terms of how much are we going to charge for a paywall? How are we going to
Is it going to be every sport?
Yeah, it's going to be every
sport. Or is it just
sport.
going to be football and basketball?
Yeah.
And then there's the question
What message does that send?
then, and then there's going to be the question of, are you going to get a season pass? Are you going to get a year pass? Are you going to get a half-year pass? Are you going to get a per game where you can buy one game?
Sport pass.
Yeah, sport pass for individuals. So if you want to watch, say our team, our men's basketball team played Martin Luther, you can pay $2.99 to watch this one game instead of having to pay $49.99 for the season or whatever. Whatever the and I'm, like I said, I'm just kind of spitballing here.
Right.
But those are the kind of questions that are also going to have to come up. So I personally prefer a situation where you can buy per game, because if you keep it to, say, $1.99, $2.99, most people can afford that to watch a game.
Yeah.
But there are some also, cable and paywalls where you can't do that. You have to buy a season pass. And I don't think that would necessarily work at Division II and Division III. I think you can get away with that at Division I. But it's a conversation that's going to be ongoing.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, what kind of conversations have been had by everybody else in other leagues, in the UMAC or otherwise. But, it's going to be a consideration. It's going to be something that's going to have to be tackled, I think, within the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so many layers to it. It's a kind of a fascinating conversation. I think there's probably that assessment of, okay, if we go behind a paywall, how much funding or resources does it end up helping our institutions? What's the bottom line number that they get by doing that? Is that worth some people not being as excited,
right.
some people not watching, tuning in, supporting where is that line? But I also, I've had this conversation with some of our schools talking about it. If a product is free, they'll live with, the score ticker isn't working tonight or at first, or
right.
The audio, we had an issue, not a big deal.
There's that question too.
As soon as you charge $1, let alone whatever XYZ number
you better
amount
not
might
have
be,
any technical difficulties.
the quality expectation changes immediately, even if it's a pretty reasonable price.
Yep.
And so I think, we've talked a lot, Jordan, our assistant commissioners, working on, even if we never get behind a paywall, or if we do, but developing conference requirements as far as any of our
Right.
products that we're going to be putting out, then partly too because of the network, to make sure that we're consistent and there's a standard that we're hitting. But if we were to ever end up, and we may never end up behind a conference paywall, I think that becomes important than just the standards and the expectations are being hit, so that people are excited or at least willing to pay what they're paying for the product they're getting.
Well, it's one of the problems that Flow ran into.
Yep.
When Flow came out, it was a really good idea, but it was expensive at the start. And you were thinking, okay, well, we're going to try this Flow hockey, Flow baseball. I mean, they were basically covering everything across the board. But they got overextended, and the quality really went down.
Yeah.
And it became a big problem for them. And that's something that we've seen, I think, with other streaming services as well. If you go behind a paywall and you hire them to come in, that the consistency just wasn't there. You could get a really good broadcast on one from Flow Hockey, but then somebody else would completely drop the ball on their end.
Right.
When you're paying the same price.
Paying the same price, and this one has a broadcaster, this one doesn't. This is a 3-camera shoot. This is on an iPhone.
Exactly.
There has to be that.
And that's the concern.
Yeah.
I think I think the experience that people had with Flow was sort of where that question goes. Okay, ESPN is seamless because they are a big conglomerate and they have the money to make it work, and they do have bottom line expectations of how it's going to look, and it does look that way. But when you are starting out and you get some of these startup companies, I think sometimes you get in that situation where you bite off a little bit more than you can chew, and you're trying your aspirations are in the right place, but your execution really lacks, and that's again where that comes in. Everybody's going to have to be on the same page as to what the expectations are, and that's one of the things that the NSIC network has done well. Is everybody has kind of a baseline expectation of what the stream is going to look like. But the question is going to be, again, when you start putting in a price, a $199, $299, $399, or $499 price line, because right now for NSIC playoff games it's $499, I think, is what the price is for the paywall. You better keep the quality better stay up there, because people are going to complain and be upset if they're. Even if it's just $5, they're not going to want to pay $5 and then have fuzzy picture, bad camera work, and a play-by-play guy who doesn't know what's going on.
And even if
you know what I mean, like that's
even if you have an ESPN quality broadcast, though, you are going to have somebody who's going to try to get that $5 back at the end of the game.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
So say I watched this whole thing from start to finish, and I am not satisfied.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Refund me.
So, but those are the questions. Those are and so there has to be a strong commitment across the board from everybody to say, this is what we need to have, and if you can't, manage that, then it basically falls apart because now we can't do it because not everybody is capable of doing it.
Right.
So that's another question and that's a bigger question. I think the D3 level.
It's a fascinating conversation. It really is.
Yeah, and I think it's going about 60, 70 miles per hour right now. It's going to go to
give up
75, 80, 85, 90 real quick.
Yeah, we're starting getting into Autobahn speeds here.
Exactly.
So
do we have enough road to get this thing to 88?
Yeah, do we have enough road to get this thing to 88?
Exactly.
Yes. So.
I want to be cognizant of your time here because you are obviously here in an official capacity. So anything else you want to throw at the viewers here before we let you go?
I would just add grateful for Superior in terms of just all that you do, both, teams very competitive and represent our conference very, very well, but also, digitally, social media, all types of content in that regard. I mean, you guys do it so well. It's a home run, the Grand Slam. Obviously, John, your staff, and Holden and company do a great job. So from a conference standpoint, we're grateful in terms of, how Superior represents us. And, usually, talking with somebody around the country or who's in your conference or that, you start saying some school names, your brand and what you've done here is certainly known and identified well, and I think that speaks to obviously the job that you and Holden have done. So, just grateful. It's always fun to be here, to be at championships, and looking forward to a good weekend. I thought for a little bit there on Wednesday you might be hosting all three championships. I thought, it's going to be quite a day at Superior on Saturday. But glad
you
to
would
at least
have seen me
almost
be as bald as John because we both would have been ripping our hair out at that point. I think.
Yeah.
But you almost made the distance without throwing a ball joke.
Yeah, I almost did. I don't usually bring it up though. I don't usually bring it up. It's my father is bald, so
it's usually me.
Yeah. But because there are days generally where like I'll get off the air and I'll see what's going on and I'll walk up to him and I'll be like, now I know why you have no hair. Like it's all fallen out because of different things, or been pulled right out, because of different things.
Yeah. As the baseball or softball schedule just changed for the 5th time this week.
Oh gosh, yeah. He is. That's. Yeah, and that's part of the season we're getting into now, which is apropos considering.
That's not really a pull your hair out thing, though, because I go into the spring expecting that.
Yeah.
That's true.
I expect that.
Well, you can only go through that so many times before you finally do just go, okay. Yeah. This is what it's going to be.
After a while, you just shrug.
Exactly.
Right. All right. Well,
yeah.
Now we have to get 10 games into 4 days.
Yeah.
All right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So everybody's stressed out up here during that time.
Yep.
Because he's got staffing and the coaches have to figure out how they're going to pitch.
Yeah.
Yes. That's.
Yep. We always seem to find a way, though.
We do find a way.
I know we've had some springs where we've been tight, but always seem to find a way. So.
Yeah. And if a few arms fall off along the way, that's the way it goes. Metaphorically speaking.
Either their arms are tired going into postseason, or our teams are better positioned because they got
right. Yeah. It's one of the two things.
One of the two.
Yeah, one of the two. So.
Exactly.
I think that's a good note to end it on. So we want to thank Corey from the UMAC for joining us. For Corey and the Big Sound, Matt Johnson, I am John Garver, and thank you for watching I Have the Swarm.